Hey, it's Jeff Hyman, your startup therapist, where we focus on the people part of startups. I've got a wonderful guest today with us, Tuck Rickards of Russell Reynolds. How are you, Tuck?
I'm doing fine, Jeff. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. I know you're bi-coastal, Bay Area, and also Boston. Is that right?
That's the case, yes.
So you see tech from both?
Boston, I see the tech from both angles. Interesting news in Boston with GE moving to Boston.
Yeah, I saw that.
Because it's an innovation hub. So even the non-obvious technology hub of Boston's got its merits.
And I'm sure you spend a lot of time on the plane back and forth.
I do.
Great. Well, thanks for taking the time to join us. I'll briefly introduce Tuck, and then we're going to get right into it. Tuck has been with Russell Reynolds for, 18 years?
18 years.
Russell Reynolds, which I'm sure most of our viewers know, is one of the preeminent retained executive search firms in the world, not just the U.S. And Tuck has the good fortune of leading the digital transformation practice at Russell Reynolds, which means that a lot of his executive search work is finding executives for both large companies to help them embody and develop their digital strategies, but also the leaders of startup and early stage companies doing CEO searches, board of director searches for startups. So, Tuck, you've got a great perspective, big and small, East Coast and West. I almost don't know where to start. But why don't we start with just the facts? Did I get them straight? Anything you want to add to kind of that perspective that you're going to bring to the discussion?
No, I think it sounds great. I mean, over the course of the time with Russell Reynolds, I've run the internet practice in the tech sector. So enjoy the disruptive kind of what's happening in the technology world. But I think the world that's very interesting today is, how is that technology disrupting business? And I think that opens up lots of other angles.
Good. So let's start right there. So let's start with a bit of a softball question. What is it that you look for and that you've learned in these 18 years of doing this that defines an A-player disruptor, the innovator or the pioneer who can lead a company, a startup company, perhaps maybe reporting to a CEO or a board member, someone who can do this? What DNA do they have in your experience?
It's a good question. I think there's two pieces that are kind of must-haves. So one is this ability to see the future and in a different way, see around corners, and kind of build that into a vision that with lots of hard work, they can get lots of people to understand and come along with them. The second piece of it is what I'll call a kind of a very operational builder who thinks of a business in terms of building blocks. And it's one thing to see a vision. It's another thing to know sequentially with limited resources, what do you do kind of month by month in terms of the product, the marketing, the team? If you put block 3 in place at the bottom of the pyramid and find out you have to pull it all down before you should have, that's a whole kind of mindset around a very pragmatic kind of resource constrained builder. I think entrepreneurs, in big and small companies need to think that way. So
what I hear you saying is the ability to see around corners and predict the future to some extent, and then the ability to bridge from here to how do we get there in a sequential way.
Yeah.
Is that about right? Do you find
those? I think part of that first one is really around the vision, and the communication skills are as important as seeing the future, but that kind of goes hand in hand.
Those skills or characteristics would almost seem to be diametrically opposed. It would seem like you wouldn't find those two things in the same person very often because of just the way people are wired, right? They're usually the mad scientist creative type or the operational builder type. At least that's the stereotype. How do you find individuals? And as a potential founder of a company, how do I know if I have both of those skills?
I think it's a great question. So we did a piece a few years ago called, it was kind of a, I can't remember the title, but it was kind of a money ball for venture capitalists. And we looked at the life cycle of a business. If you look at the first kind of 6 months or first year of a business, you often have those founder, entrepreneur, visionaries who can pull an idea and a core team together. And if you look at maybe the third stage of a business, once everything's kind of in place, there's kind of the scalers. What I was just talking about is kind of that messy middle ground where you have an idea and it needs to iterate through multiple iterations, needs to get a product to market, and you're putting in place the foundation to scale kind of from an A round to a B round to a C round. Some founders can carry the company through that stage. Only a few of the more established company executives that are scalers can actually reach back and do this with limited resources. So I think in that really tricky validation and kind of pre-scaling phase, I think you need both skill sets. And so you have to dig deep on those.
But it is a rare founder that can really take the ball the entire way down the field, right? It's just it's an evolution where it makes sense frequently to hand off to a leader who has scaled a business of a different size.
I think even if you look at some of the biggest founders, whether it's Gates or Jobs or the Google team, whether they had partners to help them operationalize the business or whether they actually gave the CEO or chair title to a business builder to complement their skill sets, I think even the most successful have sometimes been in and out of the chair or brought in a team. So that's not a bad thing.
So as the guy who does executive searches to find sometimes the replacement for the founder, what can you tell us about how do I know when it's time for me to maybe step aside, or how do I know when it is time to proactively say, you know what, this business has thankfully outgrown me or my experience. It's time to look for one or more those operators that you described. How do I know when it's time, and how do I have the intellectual honesty to do it?
I think the bottom line is just being open to that question and asking your board and your team around what we need to do to get to the next step, and listening carefully and wanting to put the best interest of the company first. And by definition, these folks are big shareholders. There's, I think, a very fundamental difference in the last 2 or 3 years. The market shifted. In the old days, it used to be you could have a founder technologist who would come to a firm like ours to recruit a commercial, sales and marketing oriented CEO who would kind of scale the business.
Yeah.
The good news for many founder entrepreneurs, I think the world's upside down now. The product kind of wins. So I think if you look at, you look at the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world, you look at the CEOs of many of the highest growth companies in the Bay Area, they are able to recruit a rock star number 2.
Right.
And so you've got people who are now coming in below founders who are not just sales and marketing people, but can kind of operationalize a business. And the founder and the everyday reinvention of the product, that is the most important piece of the company. So I think you look at Google and the evolution of where it is now, they've come back to that kind of product-led perspective at the top. So that's good news for many founders who bring that skill set. You have to be a good business partner with someone who's perhaps more commercial in some role, though, to scale the business, because it really is hard to do both.
Got it. To what extent does a founder CEO need to be a great recruiter? So if they can't afford someone like you, or you obviously can't go to an executive search firm for every single hire in the company, what can you tell us about the CEO's responsibility to become a great recruiter and harvester of talent? How big a job how big is that in their job responsibility?
It's everything, right? It's everything. The 18 wins period, you can talk to a million VCs, you'll get the same answer. I think there's 2 parts of what does good look like. Number 1 goes back to the vision, the Pied Piper, please listen to me and leave what you're doing to come join my team.
Yeah. So literally selling the dream, selling the vision.
The dream applies to your employees, your team, your customers, your partners, et cetera, your investors. I think the second part of it, though, is really a question of kind of where the bar is set. And again, this is painfully clear, but the companies that have scaled the most in the Bay Area in particular, there's a bar on talent around intellect, accomplishment, entrepreneurship that is painfully high. Yeah. And it is not just a network of people that you know. It's a very demanding screen of what good looks like, and often kind of serial successful executives who play different functional roles. And I think there's kind of a rotating canvas of hot companies where people are buying in not just to the financial upside, but being part of this kind of mission-driven team. I think the best CEOs are just quite good at that.
Got it. How does a first-time founder, CEO, begin to learn how to do that? Is it innate? Either you can sell or you can't, or is this a skill that can actually be developed either through study or mentors or courses or something? Or do I say I'm just not good at hiring, I need to bring in somebody to do that, or what?
So I'm a big fan of your initial kind of, your ecosystem of advisors up front make a big difference and can make your company look bigger than it is. So you have to be very careful on your board seats. You may have some investors, you may have other folks, and those seats you give away carefully. I think to the extent you can get 2 or 3 people you trust who've been there, done it before, who can not just advise you, but also speak on your behalf when you've got a phenomenal candidate who you're enticing to leave their company, and you've got perhaps someone who's done 2 startups as a CEO,
right,
who believes in your vision, like that could be key. And then once you have the first A player, the second one follows, and the third one follows.
Got it. So you're talking about
on the other hand,
getting some closers on my board, essentially.
And whether they're on your board or as an advisor, in kind of, part of your kind of the ecosystem of folks you're close to, I think, people who believe in your vision can help you on that in a big way. I think, most of the startups have kind of a kernel of idea, a few trusted advisors that could be friends and family around it. You then get to the stage where you may be more of a product person, you need a commercial person, you may be more of an idea person, you need someone to code the product, whatever. I think those 2, 3 almost co-founder hires really set the stage for the business. So you've got to be really careful and aim high, I think, on finding that team. And you may not have it in the first 2 months of the business, but when you get to the point where you're a year in, you have some real capital, and you're building the base that will determine the quality of everything else that follows,
right,
you better aim really high.
You talked a lot about where to source candidates from through networking and through that board, the advisors, et cetera. Let's get really specific when it comes to interviewing, because so much of the interview process is trying to be predictive on whether the person is going to be successful at my startup. You've done, I can't even imagine how many thousands of interviews in your 18 years at Russell Reynolds. What have you learned about what is predictive? What are the questions to ask versus, tell me about yourself, where our manhole covers round? What do we ask, whether it's a product manager, a VP of sales, a CFO?
The best predictor, I think, of future performance is past results, right? So you need the context of the run through someone's resume. You need the context of their career transitions. Hopefully you get the context of, please find the 2 or 3 successful runs with some tenure where you can really get an understanding of that. So of course you need that. This whole idea of kind of competency-based interviewing, which can be a general term, but drilling down for any specific role, the 3 or 4 skill sets that are absolutely critical, having them in the right order, of which are must-haves down to nice-to-haves,
yep,
and then really getting the person on the other side of the interview table to please tell me about a time where you took a new product to market with limited resources. Interesting. Okay, well, when you got stuck, how did you do that? Tell me about the team. What would your references tell about you? What were the data points of success?
So really
drilling that story.
Drilling into the story, right?
The story, which is a set of data points on what they've done in the past on a very specific skill set requirement.
Got it.
And if you do that systematically across 4 or 5 areas that matter, I guarantee you your notes will be very different than here's where the person was.
Right.
It'll be here's what the person has done and how it's relevant for this business and this role.
So what I hear you saying is focus on the competencies as opposed to they worked at this company or this title, which is nice, but it's not necessarily predictive of success.
Yes.
Just going out and recruiting someone from my competitor may not be such a good idea versus finding someone who maybe isn't even from my industry, but has done this thing 5 times successfully, much better predictor.
Yes. And
okay.
To add to this, and I know the audience for this discussion is more venture startup CEOs, but if you look at the work we do with big companies, we created this assessment methodology called predictive disruptors, where, of course, these folks for a digital role in a big company are highly digital, but we have kind of analyzed and come up with 5 or 6 different competencies around what is required for an entrepreneurial, visionary, innovative person to actually make something happen in a big company versus getting completely frustrated.
Yep.
And it all boils down to kind of patience and influencing skills and stakeholder management, things that make sense when you think about it. But if you don't pull those out in an interview, you could have someone who's great on paper who would completely hit a wall.
They'll flail in that environment where they have to convince other people of their opinions, etc.
Yeah.
Got it. So in our few minutes remaining, let's talk about some of the tougher, quirkier things that can happen in recruiting. First one I get asked frequently. I'm a CEO, a founder. I'm looking at hiring one of my direct reports. It could be a head of sales or a CFO. And I put them in front of my board, my venture capital investors, and we don't agree. Maybe there were two candidates. I think candidate A is an amazing culture fit, but my VCs think that candidate B has the perfect resume. So we just don't agree. How do you work through that type of situation? Because obviously someone's got to make the call and be held accountable to making it.
So the bottom line, whether you're working with a search partner or on your own, you've got a set of stakeholders in every search. You better get their input early on the role, the profile, and the rest of it. If it's a sales search and you're leading it as the CEO, you're going to manage the process, but you could probably bring in one or two of those stakeholders, a VC or otherwise, who would not just pitch on the role, but pitch on why they invest in the company, the upside, and the rest of it. It's helpful from a sales process. It also prevents the kind of last minute, whoops, we disagree. So I think getting alignment and then appropriate involvement at the board level can be really helpful. You mentioned the CFO and the sales role, and I would just add a different comment. If I'm the CEO and I'm committed to delivering a revenue number, I'm going to feel pretty comfortable with my salesperson, and I'm going to hire the person. My neck's on the line. I'm going to hire that person. I have not met a lot of CFOs who are comfortable with you, the entrepreneur, hiring your CFO. So I think, you get a lot of comfort from your CFOs having an insider CFO who they trust, who just feels like the business is transparent. They know they've got a direct view on the business. I think most venture players will have a very strong point of view on having a CFO who's kind of trusted on both sides in the mix, and that's good for everybody. It's good governance. So
of all the roles, that is the one where the VC's view and opinion on the final candidate matters more than any.
I think you would be wasting a lot of time as a CEO to run a CFO process in a vacuum and then hand the finalist to your CFO. I would guess there's better than 50-50 odds your finalist candidate will be known to your venture team.
Sure, absolutely. Another scenario that comes up, we make a bad hire. We've got a mishire, whether it's a VP of sales, head of marketing, CTO. How long do we give that candidate, or how long do we give that individual before we make the difficult decision to relieve them of their responsibilities and make a switch? What do we need to learn about that? You've seen this movie so many thousands of times. Is there a certain amount of time we should give them to realize we made a mistake, et cetera?
I mean, the only consistent theme I've heard is that I wish we'd moved on this earlier, period. I cannot remember. I literally can't remember the last time someone said, we moved too early, it was a mistake. Never.
Right.
So I think the bottom line is the disruption is huge. Of course, you're looking for a lot of data points to be sure it's the wrong decision. When you have enough data points and your gut is screaming loudly, it's time to move on for both parties.
Got it. So err on the side of quickly ripping off the Band-Aid if your instinct is telling you this was a mistake.
Yes.
Okay. We lost your video for a sec. Maybe your phone's ringing. Oh, you're back. Oh,
yep.
Okay, last question. Executive search firms, not just Russell Reynolds, but in general, not an insignificant investment financially or time-wise. How do I pick a search firm? I get this question time and time again. So we've decided we need to hire a CFO, our first CFO, or a new head of sales. How do I think about what search firm to use?
So I think at the end of the day, there's lots of different shapes and sizes of firms and lots of different shapes and sizes of recruiters, and you're making a decision based on the resources and specialization of a firm, perhaps, but definitely the look me in the eye and tell me you know this market and you can represent my company and you will get this done, individually. So you have to pick both. I think, a good litmus test would be the folks who do kind of human capital in the big venture private equity firms. They definitely have a map of not just firms but individuals that they will, have 2 or 3 options on every different category. The other thing I'd say is most firms and most boards will pick a handful of companies to come in and pitch for the really critically important roles, because every one of these is really, really different. And you may have the best person in the best firm, but if they have not done 2 or 3 searches in a related area, know the market, you can really burn another kind of month or 2 kind of getting through the first stages of that, where you may have the benefit of a firm or an individual that's already done that project. So
Right.
I wouldn't put too much weight on just, I did the project yesterday. I would look at that in its entirety. But part of the benefits of picking the right individual, the right firm, is you take 3 months of what you would have to do on your own combing the market, and you get it in 2 days.
Got it. And a lot of that is because they know the market. They know the candidates because they've done recent searches that are similar.
Because that is their area of focus. So they've done dozens and dozens of searches over a period of time, and they know the themes and the markets and the players. And B, because your chief information security officer in a XYZ startup that has this kind of software, they have the very specific knowledge for that search. And I think you have to drill down and really push the firms and the recruiters on what they've done recently.
Got it. Tuck, this has been extremely useful. How can people get in touch with you, learn more about your practice at Russell Reynolds, et cetera?
The website is russellreynolds.com. My email, tuck.rickards@russellreynolds. And happy to catch up in any way I can be helpful. Look forward to keeping in touch.
Great. Tuck, thank you so much for making the time today.
You bet. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Take care.
Okay, that was perfect. 21 minutes. Awesome.